I never thought I'd be the type of woman to share my life on the internet, but here I am. I need to tell this story because, honestly, I still can't believe how it all played out. My name isn't important, but let's just say that 3 years ago, I was living what I thought was a stable, comfortable life. I had been married to Daniel for 6 years, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, I believed in our partnership. We had a house, decent jobs, and what I thought was mutual respect. I worked in finance, handling corporate accounts, and Daniel was in sales. We weren't rich, but we were doing well enough to enjoy vacations, good restaurants, and a future we were slowly building together. His mother, Irene, was always a big part of his life. She was one of those overly involved mothers who always had an opinion about everything but disguised it under a sweet, "I just want what's best for my son" attitude. I tolerated her, but we were never close. Then came the moment that shattered everything. I had always trusted Daniel, but looking back, there were signs, small things that I brushed off as paranoia. Late nights at work that became more frequent, a shift in the way he touched me, little moments of emotional distance I couldn't quite put my finger on. The final blow came when I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, an expensive hotel stay, dated on a weekend he was supposed to be on a business trip. My stomach dropped. At first, I told myself there had to be an explanation, but deep down, I knew. When I finally got the courage to check his phone, I found everything: texts, pictures, and worst of all, months of messages between him and his mother discussing his affair like it was the most natural thing in the world. Irene knew. She knew the entire time, and instead of telling him to stop, she helped him cover his tracks. I felt my entire body go cold as I read through their messages. Irene wasn't just aware of the affair, she was actively involved. She gave him advice on how to lie more convincingly, reminded him to delete messages, and even suggested restaurants that were discreet enough for his little rendezvous. She talked about me like I was some clueless fool, someone too naive to ever suspect anything. I wanted to scream, to storm into the living room where Daniel was sitting and throw the phone at his face. But something inside me told me to wait. If I confronted them now, I'd be walking away with nothing but heartbreak. I needed to be smart about this, so I played dumb. I went back to our bedroom, tucked his phone back exactly where I found it, and forced myself to act normal. The next morning, I made breakfast like I always did. I even kissed him goodbye before he left for work. Then I did something I never imagined. I called Irene. My voice was bright, friendly, just like the messages she had sent to Daniel. "Hey, I was thinking, we should spend more time together. I feel like I've been so caught up with work that I haven't given enough attention to family." She ate it up immediately, probably thrilled at the thought of pulling me in closer while she and her son laughed behind my back. That's how it started, my little act, my little revenge. I started spending more time with Irene, playing the role of the perfect daughter-in-law. We had brunches, shopping trips, even spa days. I let her think she was winning, that she was successfully keeping me in the dark while she and her son continued their disgusting little scheme. And she loved it. She thrived on the idea that she was the mastermind, that I was too oblivious to ever suspect a thing. But while she was sipping overpriced lattes and gloating about how a wife should trust her husband completely, I was paying attention. I noticed the way she talked about finances, the way she handled her purse a little too carefully when the check came. I started picking up on her anxieties, the way her mood shifted when money was brought up. That's when it clicked. Irene had secrets of her own. The more time I spent with Irene, the more cracks I started to see. She wasn't as put together as she pretended to be. She talked big, always flaunting her high standards, and bragging about the wealth she and her late husband had accumulated. But I noticed small things: a nervous flicker in her eyes when the bill came, the way she hesitated before paying, and most telling of all, how she suddenly changed the subject whenever investments or assets were mentioned. So I started digging. I had access to financial databases at work, and while I wasn't about to do anything illegal, there were plenty of public records to sift through. What I found almost made me laugh. Irene was drowning in debt. The family wealth she so proudly clung to? Gone. She had refinanced her house twice, had several maxed-out credit cards, and, the cherry on top, She owed a substantial amount to a private lender, likely someone who wouldn't be too forgiving if she didn't pay up. That's when the real fun began. I kept my act going, playing the adoring daughter-in-law while planting little seeds of trust. I made a few comments about financial stress, about how tough it was juggling bills and savings, just to see how she'd react. And like clockwork, Irene took the bait. She started opening up subtly at first, complaining about unexpected expenses, then dropping hints about how difficult it was to maintain her lifestyle. A few weeks later, she finally cracked. Over lunch, she sighed dramatically and said, "You know, I always saw you as someone smart with money, not like these reckless women who marry into wealth and then squander it. You understand responsibility." I knew where this was going, so I just smiled and waited. Sure enough, she kept going. "If you ever had the means, say an opportunity to help out family, you would, wouldn't you?" I pretended to hesitate, playing my part perfectly. "I mean, of course, family helps family," I said, stirring my coffee. "But Daniel and I have been really careful with our money. I don't think he'd be comfortable lending anything out." I watched her closely, and there it was, a flicker of panic, so quick most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. Irene wasn't just in trouble. She was desperate. Over the next few weeks, I let her dig her own grave. She started dropping more hints, testing the waters, and eventually, she broke. "I just need a little help," she said one afternoon, her voice sugary sweet, but her eyes sharp. "A short-term loan. I'd pay you back in no time." That's when I knew I had her, because Irene wasn't just looking for help. She was looking for a way to manipulate me, the same way she had been manipulating everyone around her for years. I pretended to think it over, playing the role of the concerned but slightly naive daughter-in-law. "I'd have to talk to Daniel," I said hesitantly. That was a lie, of course. I had no intention of involving him. But I knew what Irene would say before she even opened her mouth. "Oh, sweetheart, let's keep this between us. You know how men are, always overreacting. I don't want him to worry." Bingo. She had just handed me exactly what I needed, a financial arrangement between the two of us, with no one else involved. I told her I could figure something out, that I might be able to move some money around from my personal savings. She nearly teared up, gushing about how grateful she was, how I was the daughter she never had. It took everything in me not to laugh. I played along, telling her I'd set up a transfer in a few days. What she didn't know was that I was already working on something much bigger, something that would take down both her and Daniel in one clean move. While Irene thought I was moving money around for her, I was busy collecting evidence. I dug deeper into her debts, her unpaid loans, and, most importantly, the shady transactions in Daniel's name. Turns out, he had been helping her cover up her financial mess for years, using our joint account. That's right. My husband, the same man who had been sneaking around behind my back, had also been siphoning off my money to bail out his mother. I could have confronted them right then, but I wanted something bigger. So, I set a trap. I told Irene I would transfer the money, but I needed her bank details. She was so eager she didn't even question it. The moment she sent them over, I had exactly what I needed. Proof of her financial desperation. Then I went to work. I contacted her creditors anonymously, tipping them off about hidden assets. I also reached out to an attorney friend of mine to start the process of separating my finances from Daniel's. He had no idea, but by the time I was done, he wouldn't have access to a single cent of my money. It was almost too easy. While Irene was blissfully unaware, probably planning her next manipulative move, I made sure her creditors came knocking hard. Within days, she was in full panic mode. "I don't understand," she whined over the phone. "They're saying I need to pay immediately, or they'll take legal action." I feigned sympathy, telling her I'd see what I could do. But behind the scenes, I was tightening the noose. At the same time, I was dismantling Daniel's world piece by piece. I had quietly consulted a divorce attorney and set everything in motion. Since I had proof he had been using our joint funds for his mother's mess without my consent, I had legal grounds to demand reimbursement. The best part? He had no idea it was coming. I was meticulous. I separated my savings, froze my personal accounts, and had my employer deposit my salary into a new private account. By the time Daniel realized what was happening, it was already too late. The day everything fell apart for them was almost poetic. I was at home, sipping coffee, when Daniel stormed in, his face red with anger. "What the hell is going on?" he barked. "The bank just froze our joint account. I tried using my card and it got declined." I barely looked up from my mug. "Oh, that's weird," I said, feigning confusion. "Maybe you should check with your mom. Seems like you've been spending a lot of our money on her." Irene called moments later, wailing like a wounded animal. "They're coming after me. I need money now." Her desperation was delicious. "Irene," I said softly, "I would love to help, but I don't think Daniel would be comfortable with that. You know how men are about money." The silence on the other end was priceless. I could practically hear her world collapsing. The walls were closing in, and I hadn't even played my final card yet. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "What the hell did you do?" he hissed, his voice shaking. "Oh, sweetheart, so many things." But I just tilted my head, acting innocent. "I protected myself," I said, finally setting my mug down. "I've been protecting you for years, too, but you made it clear that wasn't mutual." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a second, I thought he might throw something. But then his phone rang, his mother again. He hesitated before answering, and in that moment, I knew. He was caught. I stood up and walked over to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Irene's debts are all in her name, but guess what? Some of those little transactions you made? Joint account? That means you're legally on the hook too. And since I already started the divorce process and separated my finances, guess who's taking the fall for everything?" His face drained of color. "You wouldn't," I smiled. "Oh, I already did." And with that, I grabbed my keys, my pre-packed suitcase, and walked out of the house I had once called home, leaving him to deal with the mess they created. Walking away felt like breathing for the first time in years. I had set everything in motion so cleanly that there was nothing left for them to hold on to. The divorce was already underway, and thanks to the evidence I had gathered, Daniel wasn't getting a dime from me. His credit was shot, his accounts were frozen, and his name was now tangled up in his mother's financial disaster. And Irene? Well, let's just say that when debt collectors started knocking, and she realized her golden boy was as broke as she was, I imagine it was quite the wake-up call. The best part? I didn't have to do anything illegal. I didn't have to scream or beg or even cry. I simply played their own game better than they did. I moved into a new apartment, started fresh, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Last I heard, Daniel had moved back in with Irene, two drowning rats clinging to each other in a sinking ship. And me? I smiled, poured myself a glass of wine, and enjoyed the view from my new life. Because revenge isn't about rage or destruction. Sometimes the best revenge is just watching them lose everything, while you walk away untouched.